Hey, this is Ciderhelm, and here's a complete mechanics preview for Zed, the Master of Shadows. Zed is thematically similar to Shen and Talon, though his mobility mechanics will feel more familiar to LeBlanc players. He is a physical damage assassin with a base 320 movement speed and 125 attack range. For reference, these are very standard values for melee damage dealers. He is an energy-based champion with 200 base energy. Unlike several other champions, he becomes significantly more energy efficient by leveling ability throughout the game. Energy management is on the easier end of the spectrum, similar to Lee Sin in that you usually won't run out of energy too quickly if you're playing well. There is quite a bit of depth to his kit. Based on his mechanical complexity and his options at any given moment, he places squarely in the top 5 or 10 highest skill cap champions. Let's talk about his abilities. Keep in mind that this is a beta and the numbers and perhaps some mechanics may be tweaked. His passive is Contempt for the Weak. When he attacks an enemy with below 50% health, he deals an additional 8% of their maximum health as magic damage. Note that this uses maximum health, which doesn't change with their current health and will be more effective against heavier champions. This can only occur once every 10 seconds. His Q is Razor Shuriken. This is a pass-through skill shot that deals physical damage to all enemies in a mid-range line. The first enemy it strikes takes base damage plus 100% of bonus attack damage. All subsequent targets take only 70% of this damage. Note that this is bonus attack damage that scales well with items, runes, masteries, and buffs, but does not include base attack damage gained with level. With a Living Shadow active, a Shuriken will be cast both from Zed and the Shadow. These are independent shots that both aim towards the same location, similar to Lulu's Glitter Lance. If a second Shuriken strikes the same target, it is dealt 50% of the base damage to that target. Additionally, both shurikens hitting the same target will restore energy. We'll discuss the energy restoration with the next ability. It is possible to have more than one Living Shadow active at the same time. However, if more than 2 shurikens strike the same target, no additional damage occurs. In other words, there is no value whatsoever to landing 3 or more shurikens on a target. This ability has a 6-second cooldown. At rank 1 it costs 75 energy, but this reduces to 55 energy by max rank. The energy restored from landing both shurikens on a target largely offsets the cost of the shuriken at higher ranks. With 40% cooldown reduction, he can just barely cast this a second time while a Living Shadow is active, as long as he casts it immediately after summoning the Shadow. His W is Living Shadow. This places a Shadow clone at a nearby location. The range on this can be adjusted, however it cannot be placed directly next to him in normal circumstances. The Shadow does not take on Zed's appearance, meaning the enemy will be able to clearly distinguish you from the Shadow. The Shadow also cannot be moved, targeted, or damaged. Living Shadow can be cast over walls. This includes walls that are slightly thicker than the maximum range. Very thick or angled walls can also be used to summon the Shadow directly on top of Zed. Living Shadow grants very significant vision while it is active, similar to having another player in the area. The Living Shadow stays active for 4 seconds. While the Living Shadow is active, Zed can cast the ability a single time to instantly switch places with the Shadow. Note that the second cast can occur very quickly, effectively allowing for a flash with a double tap. As mentioned with the shurikens, landing 2 shurikens on a target restores energy. The amount of energy is between 20 and 40 depending on the rank of Living Shadow. This refund also occurs when 2 Shadow Slashes hit the same enemy, which is the next ability we'll discuss. The refund can occur multiple times while a Living Shadow is active, but can only occur once per each individual spell cast. This has a fairly long cooldown of 16 seconds at max rank. With 40% cooldown reduction, this has a 9.6 second cooldown at max rank. The cooldown starts once the initial spell is cast and is not delayed if Zed does not activate the ability a second time. The energy cost of this ability starts at 40 energy but reduces to 20 energy by max rank. Higher ranks of Living Shadow dramatically increase Zed's energy efficiency. This is because this ability costs less while providing more energy back for his other spells. Zed's E is Shadow Slash. This is a short-range AoE centered around Zed that deals physical damage equal to a base amount plus 90% of his bonus attack damage. Like shurikens, note that this is bonus attack damage that scales well with items, runes, masteries, and buffs, but does not include base attack damage gained with level. While Living Shadow is active, Shadow Slash deals a second AoE around the Shadow. These AoEs have different secondary effects. The AoE centered around Zed will reduce the cooldown of his Living Shadow cast by 1 second per enemy struck. This means that Living Shadow, which normally has a long cooldown, can be dramatically reduced by landing Zed's AoE on enemies. The AoE centered around the Shadow slows enemies by 20% to 40% depending on rank. This slow lasts for 1.5 seconds. If both AoEs strike the same enemy, there is no increase in damage, but the slow is 50% stronger. In other words, a slow with an overlap can be 30% to 60% rather than 20% to 40%. Also, like Shurikens, landing 2 AoEs on the same target will return energy. With higher ranks of Living Shadow, this energy largely offsets the cost of the ability. There is one big difference between Shuriken and Shadow Slash. When a third Living Shadow is active and 3 AoEs land on a single target, that target will be slowed even more. Shadow Slash has a 3-second cooldown and a 50 energy cost at all ranks. With no cooldown reduction, this can be cast twice while Living Shadow is active. With 40% cooldown reduction, this can be cast 3 times with the Shadow active. Additionally, some cooldown reduction will increase his potential with his ultimate, which we're about to cover. Zed's ultimate is Deathmark. This is a mid-range ability that can only be targeted on an enemy champion. There are 3 components to Deathmark. First, there is a dash that brings Zed to his target. Second, a Living Shadow is summoned. Third, a debuff is applied to the target that will detonate after 3 seconds. Let's start with the dash. While animated similar to other dashes, this actually makes Zed fully untargetable, popping all incoming projectiles, normal attacks, and spells, allowing him to ignore incoming skill shots. The dash also tracks a target for the duration of the animation. In other words, if an enemy flashes away during the dash, Zed will continue towards their new location. The dash will bring Zed to the front of his target in relation to where he initially cast it from. When the dash ends, he deals physical damage equal to 100% of his total attack damage and applies the Deathmark debuff. This damage is effectively the same as a normal attack. On top of this, he will attempt to instantly land a normal attack provided the target is still in range. This will normally mean he deals 200% of total attack damage upon striking a target. The next component of the ultimate is a Living Shadow. This is summoned behind the target in relation to where Zed initially casts the ultimate. This is mechanically identical to his other Living Shadow, including the 4-second duration, and can exist simultaneously. As with Living Shadow, Zed can cast his ultimate a second time while this Living Shadow is active to switch places. This cannot be quickly double-tapped, as the swap is delayed by his dash animation. This allows Zed to choose whether to stay in front of or behind a target. The third and final component of the ultimate is a debuff applied to the target when Zed's dash completes. After 3 seconds, this debuff explodes, dealing physical damage to the target. The amount of damage is equal to between 40% and 50% depending on rank of all damage Zed dealt to the target while the debuff was applied. Note that this damage is not double taxed by armor, meaning if you deal 100 physical damage during these 3 seconds, you can expect Deathmark to explode for 40 to 50 physical damage at the end. Additionally, this works well with his passive, which deals magic damage based on the target's maximum health. This is because the bonus damage gained in the detonation is not affected by the target's magic resistance. Oddly, we found Deathmark's damage was attributed to a Kali in our match. Against an opponent who becomes untargetable, Zed will still track the target and land near them with a shadow. However, Spell Shield will negate every component of the ability, including the movement and Living Shadow. For clarification, this is extremely unusual for Spell Shields, as they will normally not prevent movement or secondary effects even on targeted spells. While I expect this will be changed, Spell Shield issues have been overlooked in past releases, most notably Hecarim. Deathmark has no energy cost, and the cooldown is reduced from 120 seconds at rank 1 to 80 at rank 3. Now that we've discussed abilities, there are a few things that are worth going over. The first thing to say is that this guy is an assassin through and through. He has a lot of damage potential, but very little in terms of survivability. In other words, he lacks shields, regeneration, or anything else that will help him deal with damage over time. He's generally going to be countered by champions who can outlast his burst, especially if they have some form of sustain. While his ultimate dash can pop projectiles, his Living Shadow swap doesn't do this, and he's potentially going to have problems with harassment over time from champions with targeted abilities that he can't dodge. Now, if it wasn't obvious, he has a ton of mobility and a lot of options at any given moment. The fact that he has 2 separate swaps he can use, as well as an ability that makes him untargetable, is going to allow for some seriously outstanding plays. He does have some energy issues in the early game if you simply spam his abilities. This is something we'll talk about in a moment in regards to leveling his abilities, but I definitely caution that you need to get used to the flow of his abilities. Let's talk a little more about some of his abilities. His passive is fantastic for minion farming. It really does make last hitting quite a bit easier. Now, keep in mind with his shurikens that they're going to be easier to land if your opponent is slowed. Consider using your Shadow Slash slow on an opponent before firing shurikens to keep an opponent from easily dodging your shot. In regards to Living Shadow, I'd say there are a few important things. First, you can use it to zone an opponent into a specific area that may allow for easier gank setups. Putting the shadow in someone's path is going to make that path far less desirable to someone. Of course, you could get that shadow set up right where you expect someone to go, and this will often be the case when they only have one escape path. But getting the shadow in a location they may flash or blink to will be especially cool. For example, if you see a Lee Sin place a ward to dash to, that may be a great place to drop a shadow at the same time. In regards to swapping spots with your Living Shadow, this is obviously a very good escape and initiation mechanism. For escaping, swap places immediately if someone is on you, then immediately cast Shadow Slash to slow them. For initiating, cast Shadow Slash to slow your opponent before swapping on top of them. Just keep in mind that Living Shadow swaps are one way. You can't go in and right back out, so you shouldn't consider it reliable harassment if you can't commit to staying in range of your opponent. Given his lack of sustain, casual trades aren't going to be favorable in a lot of places, so look for opportunities to really nail into somebody and ideally kill them or push them out of lane if you're going to swap in to initiate. I would argue that you should not pull out a Living Shadow when you're going to have a Living Shadow available from your ultimate. It's not going to do anything for your damage against a single target. Yes, you get a slightly better slow out of it, but it's already a very strong slow. There will be rare opportunities, of course, where having two shadows out will be fantastic. This is particularly true against multiple targets. Expect pro players to pull off some amazing stuff. And of course, using it for another repositioning option is going to be good. But that's what I'm getting at by saying you shouldn't pull it out for damage during your ultimate. You should pull it out for positioning the moment you know that's important. It's possible that will be right before your ultimate, but that'll be rare. As yet another odd cooldown reduction note, at max rank with 40% cooldown reduction, using Living Shadow, then casting Death Mark when that Living Shadow expires for another Living Shadow, then casting Living Shadow again once the second Shadow expires, is easily possible against a single opponent. One more thing about his ultimate. There is a massive amount of damage that can be dealt very quickly, and this alone is what makes him an outstanding assassin. Burn everything you can and make sure you're getting normal attacks out. You really want to make sure you're going to get one auto attack at sub 50% health for the passive to kick in as well. I mentioned that having some cooldown reduction will allow Shadow Slash to contribute more to his ultimate. This is because the debuff lasts for 3 seconds and Shadow Slash has exactly a 3-second cooldown. Even if you're not building heavily for cooldown reduction, having even a small amount will let you squeeze 2 casts in. I'm not sure the best way to level his abilities. Obviously the Shadow Slash AoE will be a prime candidate if you need that slow to do anything effective. It's also a great farming and pushing ability, especially with gear. The Shurikens are great for safe poke and damage, and unlike the AoE you can get more damage by landing multiple shots. It's also nice to bring their cost down with rank. Now, all of this said, the Living Shadow spell is deceptive. Normally this would be an obvious candidate for leveling last since it has a long cooldown and adds relatively little per rank. However, the Living Shadow is useful. The cooldown can be brought all the way down to 9.6 seconds with cooldown reduction and ranks. Given that Shadow Slash casts reduce its cooldown, it can easily be brought down to just a few seconds between active Living Shadows, but only if you've ranked it up. And more than anything else, Living Shadow has a huge impact on your energy efficiency, since it both costs less and returns a majority of energy used on your other abilities. Ranks in Living Shadow are the difference between chain casting over long periods of time and running out of energy after burst damage. Honestly, the way you level is situational. If you can burst someone quickly and you don't need the slow, Shuriken is a prime candidate. If you need the slow or have a great lane for farming and pushing, level the Shadow Slash. And if you need sustained damage and rounded out capabilities, I think Living Shadow ranks will be the best way to go. We'll see how this plays out. For summoner spells, I'd definitely say Exhaust and Flash are tier 1, but I'd also say Ignite is very strong. If we find that Ignite works on his ultimate in the future, it may very well be a must-have. In terms of items, I think there are a lot of standard options that will work for him, but there are a couple things that stand out to me. First, I would say cooldown reduction, particularly 40% cooldown reduction, is enormously helpful. His cooldowns are pretty short, and as always, short cooldowns make prime choices for cooldown reduction, as you'll realistically get more casts of them in a fight. Armor penetration is also going to be very nice, and we've heard that Season 3 is going to make armor penetration stack more favorably. Cooldown reduction and armor penetration scream for a brutalizer among other things. I don't see any way around this being a core item on him. Beyond this, having some slowing potential is also very strong. While I wouldn't argue for a Frozen Mallet unless the survivability is that important to you, I would say that a Trinity Force makes an excellent investment. The Phage and Sheen will both be excellent additions to his kit, and the additional movement speed certainly won't hurt. Thanks for watching the Zed Mechanics preview. If you or your friends are new to the game and you want to get up to level, I recommend checking out www.learntheleague.com for information on my ebook.